We've had this old gate for a long time, and the fact is, it's past time to change it, because lately we've had a lot of trespassers. Now most of them, nearly all of them, are deer, and deer in my garden is like, it's not something that I like. A couple of them have not been deer, and I don't like that either, and so it's time to make a change in the perimeter. And so the gate has to be secure, like really secure. It has to be convenient so that it is painless to open, perhaps even automatic. And it has to look good from the outside, because even if I want it as secure as a penitentiary, I don't want it to look like a penitentiary around here. So I've got to get my head pretty deep into this project and, pull a rabbit out of the hat and see what it is that's going to be sort of barring the way and inviting the guests into my driveway. I've got lots of steel around here. I've got a pile of gravel, I've got a little excavator, and I've got concrete tools. So let's see what we can come up with. I'm digging in front of the house, beside the highway. There's lots of utilities out here, and so the first thing that you've always got to do is dial 811, or at least call 811, call before you dig, and make sure that there's nothing in the grade that's going to cause you a lot of trouble, slow up your job, and maybe bankrupt you. I've had two other backhoes in my life. The little Kubota attachment that you've seen on the channel. It's about equal parts toy and tool. But before that, for a couple of years, I had a Case 580L four-wheel drive extend-a-hoe, just a terrific backhoe. Now, both of these outfits have been a blessing in my life, but I've learned that there is at least a couple of reasons that many excavators are showing up in greater and greater numbers these days. The first has got to be their versatility and their agility. They can do anything except carry dirt over distance, and they can get into places and punch above their weight better than anything else that you can buy. Add to that their controllability, they're safe, they're easy to transport, and the incredible variety of attachments that you can get for them. I mean, how are you going to beat it? They're everywhere. They're increasing in number, they're increasing in quality, and I'm just so thankful for the way that this particular machine increases my productivity. So Oregon gets a lot of rain, and in Douglas County, the bottom of the valleys is always covered with black mud. Black mud is a clay, really. I mean, you could about as easily call it black clay as black mud. But the problem, as I have talked about on this channel before, is that clay soils, super fine particulate soils, are expansive. What that means is, when they are dry, they shrink, and when they're wet, they expand. And it wreaks havoc with just about anything you're trying to put on it, or in it, or place, and deal with, on black mud or any other expansive clay type of soil. Now here's a real good example of why you need to get down at least 20 inches to get bearing, because at about 20 inches around here, you get a fairly uniform moisture content. Now we've got a little shale and some bar run up here. I don't know if nature put that there or if it was an earlier road, but it is in a matrix of black mud, which dries and shrinks. I'll show you some cracks over on the other side of the road until we get down to where it's still moist. And you can see that line where it is just black mud and it is fairly wet. And as you get down here lower, the moisture increases. That actually can be squeezed and form a ball with it, which means that it hasn't really shrunk much yet. So I'm going to I've overdug this about 6 inches. It's about 3 feet deep, which means that the moisture will stay consistent down here. I'm going to put some structural fill on top of it and pour the footings and piers right here on this, what otherwise is really junk soil. This is what black mud does in the first, 16 or 18 or 20 inches in the summer around here. It just pulls apart. And my dad put this fence in 30 years ago, and he was thinking he was doing a good thing putting concrete at the top of the posts, but not at the bottom of the posts. And so what happens here is post jacking, where in the summer the black mud shrinks back and the particles fall in there and fill up the space. There's a
very dead snail, fills up the space that's created by the shrinking mud, and then in the winter the mud swells up and pushes that post out incrementally, bit by bit, year by year. It's important to get down into the uniform moisture content and then concrete these things all the way to the bottom. Now, I don't know if you can tell on time lapse, but this black mud is so dense, I'll call it hard even though it has moisture, that a 2-foot bucket with a butter bar on there, that is the 4 by half piece of mild that I put on there last week, that little 10,000 pound excavator just almost won't push it down in there, and I'm just scraping off a ½ inch at a time, and I'm tired of that. So in order to get the corners of this thing gouged out, I'm going to switch back to the 12-inch bucket, just kind of tear the world apart in there a little bit, and then go back to the 2-foot bucket to smooth it up. That's the advantage of a quick change system. I'm not an operator, but at least the quick change gives me one little advantage that makes me look like an operator on time lapse. I'm about 10 inches over deep. As I got to thinking about it, I realized this is a side that just has to stay in the right spot. So I went down some more. I'm actually going to take that one down about 6 inches, I think. As long as I've gone to the trouble of installing this thing and excavating, I might as well over-excavate. Cost me an hour of time and $15 worth of gravel. Same concrete and a lot of peace of mind. And peace of mind is worth, you know, more than 15 bucks for sure. Well, I dropped this gravel in here Friday afternoon, thinking I could compact it on Saturday, but I couldn't get the compactor started. So I went in and rented one this morning, and I had this gravel pretty wet when I dropped it in, and there's still moisture in it, but I'm not sure there's enough. So I'm gonna go over this once, and if it's not coming up real tight, I'll go run a hose out if it'll reach, and make sure we have something close to what is called optimum moisture, which causes it to actually hold together and compact in a way that you can count on. If it's dry, you're kidding yourself. Well, we've come quite a ways on this. The trick with suspending anchor bolts in the air over a big hole in the ground, when the anchor bolts have to be in an exact position, is that it is hard to establish both line and grade simultaneously. And so what you have to do is start a framework where you establish one at a time. First the grade, then the beginning of the line, and then the ability to adjust to be exactly in line in both directions, so you get line and grade. It's correct up and down and in the X-Y axis also. So we've got that pretty well taken care of. We started with these boards right here, the lower boards, to establish grade. Then these boards to provide a basis for establishing the line. Then these boards to establish two of the dimensions exactly off of center. And last, we'll put a form right inside of here so that X, Y, and Z are all exactly where they go. The challenge that we have now is getting into this space and attaching these stirrups. These are stirrups. The square number 3 bends down there are hoops, creating that grade beam. But these tie the big mats down below up into the pier up at the top. And so the trick is going to be to get these anchored correct in X and Y, because Z, or up and down, is taken care of by where it sits on the lower mat. I hope you can see that. I'm going to break one of the cardinal rules. I can't get down in there and tie that, but I can get a stinger down in there and weld it. So even though welding rebar connections is usually just not acceptable because the inspector can't know what it does to the heat treating at the bend. You know, how that sudden localized heat changes the hardness or the temper of the rebar. Doesn't matter. I'm going to tack welds because otherwise I just can't hold those in the right place, and they have to be in the right place.
Now, rebar placement generally is not as, precise as a lot of the other things that happen in construction and a lot of the other things that happen in concrete work. The rebar just has to be close, which usually is fine, except with these stirrups, which I bent myself, the placement has to be close to perfect because the anchor bolts have to drop in. There has to be enough concrete coverage between the rebar and between the anchor bolts and the face of the form, because right here at the top of these piers is going to be where all of the pressures and all of the forces related to this gate assembly are greatest. So these things have to be strong. So in order to get these stirrups in exactly the right place and exactly the right width, I'm using the horizontal pieces of rebar on the inside of the stirrups and a 6-inch wide rip of plywood at the bottom to squeeze everything down to exactly what it ought to be. In the next video, you're going to get a close-up look at the forms when they're in place, the chamfer strips, the form release agent, the cutters, the anchor bolt assemblies themselves, that all of this with dirt work and compaction and rebar placement has just been the groundwork for. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.